This is Acts chapter 12. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison. Handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left them. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You must be out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet, and I'm better, but not perfect. And described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. Then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. He had been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon. They now joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robe, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a god, not of a man." Immediately, Herod did not give praise to God, and an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God continued to spread and flourish. When Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. Guide my mouth, I speak the message that I prepared to be his message, not my message. That his will might be done, not mine. That he might receive glory and honor, not I. And all those with ears might hear the words of the Lord. Amen. One of the interesting things about the book of Acts is that it's a history book. It tells the story of the early church. And what's interesting about that is that in many ways it's no different than much of the Hebrew Bible. But it's a different treatment oftentimes because we sort of read this and we go, "Oh yeah, this is our storybook. This is what we want it to be like for us." And so we have a tendency to read it more prescriptively, more telling us how we're supposed to do things, particularly in many parts of the church. then when we read the stories about the patriarchs or the kings or the people of Israel or something, although in reality both are describe people doing stuff, and then it's up to us in order to figure out, well, how do I then apply it to myself today? Because when we read this, we may find ourselves in situations that are the same as this, and we have to say, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And most of the time in the book of Acts, it is something to at least take into consideration to be emulated by the church. This is how the church behaved, and for the most part, they meet some success, although they also meet some defeat. It's always interesting to me that this text, sort of dealing with Peter's escape, just glosses over the fact that James, son of Zebedee, is executed. Same situation. It's not that, oh, well, if you follow this rule book, or this playbook, that you will, find success. If a Christian leader is thrown in jail, pray for them and they'll be let out. Sometimes that happens. I think I shared the story about was that Iraqi or Syrian Christian was arrested by ISIS and was in prison for a year, and his community prayed for him, and eventually he was let out. There were other people who were arrested at the same time who were killed. So we pray, but it may you might not be Peter, you might be James, son of Zebedee, and found worthy of suffering for the name. So one of the things is that we read this and we try to get some sense of the historicity, the nature of all the players in it, and then we can start to extrapolate something out. Now the first thing is it starts with mention of King Herod. About this time, King Herod arrested someone who won. Now the first stumbling block is this is the third, I think, king at this point to be named Herod. It's the grandson of Herod the Great, who's the Herod who tries to get baby Jesus in the Christmas story. This is Herod Agrippa the First. Just to make things fun and exciting, there's going to be a later. But there's a Roman emperor named Agrippa, so you can't just call him Agrippa because that would also get confusing. So this is King Herod Agrippa the First. Now what's interesting about him is that he made a huge show of being an observant Jew. He actually was raised in Rome because his dad was, I forget if he was trying to kill him or something, but he was raised in Rome. But when he returns to Israel, he makes a big show of being an observant Jew. He goes to the temple, he goes to the synagogue, or he goes to the temple to make the offerings and such. There was even a phrase we get from one of the Jewish sources of the time. The king is led by the queen, and the queen is led by Gamaliel. Gamaliel, remember, is the Pharisee who stands up in the Sanhedrin and says, hey, let's not persecute these Christians. They might be of God, and if they are, we don't want to be on the wrong side. And if they aren't of God, we don't have to worry about them. God will sort them out. Gamaliel is the guy who teaches Paul. It's his, it's sort of like Billy Graham 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Right? Gamaliel is the most prominent religious godly man in ancient Israel at this time. Gamaliel fixes all the problems that Shammai creates after Hillel, and Hillel is the rabbi whom Jesus quotes so often. When he's asked what's the most important command in the Bible, Jesus quotes Hillel. So Hillel is way up high. If you've been to a college, it is a Hillel house, the group for a Jewish community in a college. Hillel is right up here. After Hillel, they have Shammai, who's a jerk, and he messes all sorts of stuff up. And then Shammai, gets replaced by Gamaliel, and he fixes everything. King Herod Agrippa the First is said to have essentially followed Gamaliel. He's a godly man. When there's a discussion about that he's an Edomite or that he's not really an Israelite, because that's one of the problems with Herod is that he's not. He pretends to be Hasmonean, he pretends to be one of the Maccabee descendants, but he's not. The Jews burst out. They loved Herod Agrippa so much that they burst out, "You're our brother! You're our," they're sort of waving over all the problems with his family bloodline. He, to give you a sense, another thing, when he's king of Judea, when Caligula, right? If you know nothing about Roman history, but Caligula is not one of those names that you go, "Oh yeah, I have warm fuzzies thinking about that." He's a really bad guy. Caligula wants to send a statue of himself to Israel, to Jerusalem, and erect it in the temple. And Herod Agrippa says, to crazy Caligula, no, you don't want to do that. And he succeeds in convincing Caligula not to do that. Under other circumstances, we might say this is a pretty good, godly guy. He's all right. But what we see with this text is that there's a problem with what we might describe as a populist. Somebody who does things and is popular as a ruler. He does these things that most of the people like, but we have to remember that original sin is a reality. All humanity is flawed. And so if something is popular, if something is supported by most people, it probably isn't godly. It falls under that influence of sin and such. Remember, when the Israelites are going, into the promised land, 10 out of 12 of them go, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to follow God. Only 2 actually follow God. Joshua and Caleb. Selfishness, not virtue, is what's popular. Solzhenitsyn talks about the fact that capitalism needs Christianity. Because if it doesn't have Christianity, it becomes a sort of despotism of the powerful. As Bernie Sanders would say, the rich get richer. Those who have get more, and those who don't get less. But secular totalitarianism always leads to death camps in the Gulag. That's the whole point of the Gulag Archipelago. You need a moral voice. You need a virtuous voice that Christianity has in order to mitigate against original sin, the selfishness of the human spirit. And so, although Caligula is popular, he's wicked. What does Jesus say in John chapter 15? If the world hates you, remember it hated me first. But if you belong to the world, it will love you. Jesus sets out this clear dichotomy between his followers and what the world likes, what's going to be popular. And so then, when we read this and we see this playing out, it should be a red flag should be going off. We should be saying to ourselves, should our goal then be to make the church popular? Should it be to make Christianity the thing that everybody signs up for? Because when everybody signs up for it, when everybody's on board and says, "Oh yeah, this is a good thing," that's exactly the moment that you go, probably it's been corrupted. Probably it isn't very Jesus-like. It isn't very Christian. Because Jesus says, no, the world hates me. What's interesting as we look at this text is that this is a small portion of history when Jews were in control or were popular. They were the majority. And so by this religious struggle that's going on between Jews and the emerging church, the Christians, that the powers that to be could curry favor with a larger part of the population by persecuting Christians and on behalf of the Jews, as it were. The next 1,500 years or so of human history, unfortunately, we don't usually look at those parts of human history because they're not in our Bible. But the next 1,500 years or so show that when the Christians are in power, when there's more Christians than there are Jews, then the governments just persecute the Jews with crusades and inquisitions and pogroms and such. Because that way they can play to the masses of people who are Christians nominally. Because the powerful never actually are promulgating the faith of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus is not on the world hates him. So we get this interesting sort of socio-political play that King Herod Agrippa is going on here. He arrests James, son of Zebedee, and he arrests Peter, and he locks Peter up. And James he puts to death, and Peter he's sort of holding on to till after the Passover so he can make himself look good. And he locks Peter up, and it describes these series of guards. It's probably some sort of shift designation that they've got him under 24-hour surveillance, and he's described there as sleeping, between the two guards in chains, maybe chained to them. And the angel shows up, and I love this, and strikes him on the side, wakes him up. I won't ask Michelle if you've ever had to shake Justin in order to wake him up. I know my mom certainly had to do that to me when I was, so Peter is described as slumbering so much. He's got to be shook, and as he's let out, the text says it doesn't know if he actually knows that it's going on or if it's just a vision. He thinks, he's just been thinking about escaping so much that he thinks maybe this would be what's happening. But lo and behold, God is actually doing it for him and makes him escape. He goes to Mary, John Mark's mother's house. He goes there, and what's her name? Rhoda, thank you. Rhoda, the servant girl, doesn't know that it's happening, and doesn't know that he's there, and then he comes and reveals himself. What's interesting is this is the last miracle involving Peter. Remember, Peter has been with Jesus. He pulls the fish out and the money, and he does all sorts of other miracles. There's healings and there's stuff. But this is the end for Peter. No more miraculous things. There's a transition in the book of Acts that the goal, the focus of the book of Acts is now shifting to Paul and Barnabas and Silas and his missionary works and the miracles that they involve. But Peter now is, the time of Peter's miracles and the miracles involving Peter are shifting. There's also something happening, I think, in the role that Peter has, that he's moving from some sort of a frontline missionary who's always out, preaching and showing people that God, this gospel is true. He's shifting from that to a more of a figurehead or administrative or organizational leader. Remember, it's Peter who is described as the founder of the church. Later on, when in this text, when he comes, he says, "Make sure you tell James," and James will take up the mantle of the leadership of the Jerusalem church. So that in chapter 15, it's James who's now has this thing. But Peter is transitioning a role from sort of like being a missionary to being an organizational leader. Now, this is not to say that his ministry is done by any means. That he's not going to do great things. Remember, he's about, in a while, he will be martyred for the faith. So I don't want you to think that he's some sort of rear echelon, hack who doesn't do anything but push paper. But his role is changing. His faith is changing. And it speaks to me about how our faith progresses. Both as individuals and as an institution. When we're young in the faith, we need miracles. We need sort of a powerful way of God moving in our lives to sort of shake us out of our complacency. To get us to see that there is something different about this Jesus. There is something different about being God. And so there's all sorts of miracles that can happen. There are healings. There are divine providing. There are things that God does. There are ways that He moves, visions and dreams and experiences, and ecstatic experiences, and all sorts of things that God does. And then we come to faith. We say, yes, I want to be a follower of Jesus. I believe this. I want this to have power in my life. And then what happens is we go through this sort of transition where we change a little bit. Our faith is no longer based on all these miracles, but we begin to learn and understand about who God is and His reality. And we begin to apply that to our lives. And then there's a challenge that happens. Something comes up and it shakes our faith. We enter a rocky period. Now what happens at that point is we either, in some cases people fall away. Jesus describes them as people who, like the seed that shoots up and it looks good and then the sun comes and withers and it's gone. And we know plenty of stories. In fact, we know our own stories where it seemed like we were going to go that way. We know plenty of other stories where it seems like somebody has completely lost the faith they once had. And sometimes people even die in that state. But many of us have been through those dark periods, what some writers call the dark night of the soul. We go through those challenges, those times when it seems like we lose our faith, and somehow we make it through that and we get to another miraculous point. It might not be the sort of showy miracle. It might not be the fourth man in the fire who's shining and looking like the sons of God. It may not be a miraculous healing, but just somehow it's an amazing thing that God still cares about us even though we've forgotten Him. Or we haven't forgotten Him, we've rejected Him and slammed the door in His face. And we just happen to peek behind that door and we realize God's still standing there, calling us, loving us, not angry with us. We encounter a whole new depth of faith and understanding, and it skyrockets. We continue to grow up and advance in our understanding and our belief, and we're bold and make. And then we encounter another rocky point. We encounter another challenge. And the process is repeated however many times we're willing to persevere until we're buried. Amazing things. Plateau, challenge, struggle, get through that, amazing things. But what happens is that in each successive progression, the nature of the miracle changes. But we carry that through. And so we see that this year that Peter is no longer going to have these amazing miracles. He's never going to see these things happen. But his faith is going to continue to grow. Even as his faith looks different. We see this in churches and organizations that in the beginning things just, the Spirit of God moves powerfully and visibly and it's an amazing thing. And then it's a little bit different, but no less miraculous. Just doesn't quite seem so showy because we don't need it to be quite so showy. You see that here. It's a little bit like the way that our food tastes develop. One of the things about having a cold this past week, it's the first time this has ever happened to me. I could not taste the mintiness of my mouthwash. I never had quite that sort of. I could feel that it was cold when I went. You get that cold burst, but I couldn't taste the mint. I couldn't taste Skittles. You ever eat Skittles? Right? If you can't taste Skittles, there's something wrong with your taste buds. Now, kids love that sort of powerful, hardcore bite, the flavor. And sometimes when we're young in the faith, we need that sort of shocking, jarring experiences. But as we mature in the faith, we become like people who eat fine cheeses. Raymond's not here, so everybody else likes cheese, right? And you ever eat like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old cheese, and it just has all these lovely, nutty, delicious layers of flavor to it, and you feed it to a 3-year-old, and they're like, I want more. They just don't appreciate it. You could be feeding them, Kraft American, and they wouldn't care, right? Cheese, cheese is cheese. In that same way, when we progress in our faith, we begin to notice some subtleties of the Spirit that are in many ways more profound than that assault of flavor that we needed when we were younger. But would be lost on somebody who hasn't developed an appreciation for it. The Holy Spirit works that same way. When we're young, we need to be grasped by the amazingness of the resurrection. But as we begin to see God's hand moving all over, when we begin to compare what's one resurrection really in comparison to the existence of the universe, there's a subtlety to our faith, a depth to our faith that develops. And while it may not seem so bright, is in many ways so much more delightful. The third section of this scripture is a fascinating one, this description of Herod Agrippa's death. One of the things it reminds us is that phonies are known by God and revealed by Him too in the end. You see, we live our lives surrounded by folks who seem healthy, seem to have it all together, but all of a sudden something comes and reveals that, no, maybe there isn't quite so much joy as it once seemed. Luke, remember Acts is written by Luke, and Luke is a physician. Luke describes Herod's death in more explicit terms than Josephus, who also describes Herod's death. An angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. This is not the worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, they crawl in skinny and crawl out stout. This is, he was eaten by worms and then died, not the other way around. Probably these are intestinal roundworms, which cause a blockage in here. If you've ever had indigestion, just imagine it by being from a 10 or 12-inch intestinal roundworm. You vomit them up sometimes. Probably that's how Luke knew that. Not a pleasant way to go. But on the outside, he looked all sorts of healthy and good. It's interesting the description that Luke has in connection between these two. The story is that he's having this political battle. Remember, this is the populist, the guy who's always trying to show how pious and godly he is. He's the politician going to church with a big, well-worn Bible, who's living a life that's completely antithetical to that later on. He goes and he's having this battle, and he makes this reading, and they say, "Oh, this is the voice of a God." And he goes, instead of going, "Oh, shucks, no, what does Jesus say when Jesus describes it's good? No one is good but the Lord your God." Instead of being humble and refuting them, he just goes, Remember, this is the guy who tells Caligula, "Don't erect your statue and make yourself into God." But here he's doing it. All that piety, all that anti-idolatry that he has in his heart that seemed to be coming out was clearly for show. At his heart, he really wanted to be like that. He seemed healthy. You look at him and go, "Boy, look at how massive he is," and such. No, it's not muscle, it's worms. What does Jesus say to the Pharisees? "Be careful, woe to you who are whitewashed tombs. You look good on the outside, but inside you're full of death and decay." The church is struggling. The church is being persecuted. The church has this popular ruler, and it seems like the entire society is against them. And here we have this poignant reminder that although it may seem like everybody is against you and that they're all so strong and almighty and all-powerful, they can be brought down by a little worm. But many times in the church, we have to be careful because we're the ones who seem so powerful. We're the ones who seem so helpful. We're the ones who seem so pious. And we read this and we take this as a warning to us too, that we don't want to be those sorts of folks. We don't want to be the folks who make a big show about how religious we are, but it hasn't really taken heart in us, in our attitudes. But we can also read this and be reminded that no matter what powers it is we seem to be against, no matter what setting it is that we're against, and it seems like the deck is just stacked against us, yet we in this country have been blessed for many, many, many years. The church has been, if not supported by the majority, it's sort of had a favored status in the hearts of many people. I think for lots of times selfish reasons. They want to sort of show off how good they are, and so they're nice to the church, thinking that that will somehow give them something. There may come a time, in fact, I believe there will come a time, we're probably only 10, 15, 20, 25, 50 years away, but it's coming. When it's going to seem like everything is going against us. When it will just be one thing after another after another. And we know this because we've seen this throughout history and we see this throughout the world, where the church is persecuted. And we will again turn to this 12th chapter of Acts and see that God moves miraculously sometimes to deliver His people. He gets them out of jail. And sometimes He moves in much more understandable, less mysterious ways, and yet His will is always known. And ultimately, the message of Jesus Christ will be victorious. Not because of us, not because of our power, our might, but because of our faith in Him to work it out. Amen.